The air in Albany that morning was colder than usual, and Letitia James noticed it the moment she stepped out of her SUV. There was no camera waiting, no crowd chanting, no press briefing scheduled. For a woman used to commanding headlines, the silence was unsettling. Inside her office, the blinds were still drawn from the night before. Her assistant had left a stack of folders and an espresso on her desk. But there was something else, a red envelope, centered perfectly. No label, no seal. She hesitated. Letitia James had received countless letters, threats, even fan mail. But this was different. This wasn't a message, it was a warning. She peeled it open slowly, like she was diffusing something. Inside, a single document stamped and time-coded. Request for Professional Misconduct Review, Office of Attorney Regulation and Ethics. Allegations: financial misconduct, mortgage concealment, abuse of prosecutorial discretion, the kind of claims she'd made a career launching against others. Letitia dropped the document onto her desk, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling. No one was supposed to question her, not here, not now. But just as she reached for her phone, 200 miles away, another conversation was unfolding. Washington, D.C. Inside the Eisenhower building, Stephen Miller stood in front of a digital display showing page after page of the leaked document. "We've verified 3 properties, Jim," he said. "All connected, all hidden." Jim Jordan leaned in, arms crossed. If this was a Republican AG, the media would already have a countdown clock. Stephen nodded. "Then let's give them one anyway." They weren't just planning a press release. They were planning a reckoning. By noon, the hashtag was alive. Number James Mortgage Gate. Not a smear, not a distraction, a fuse. And somewhere in New York, Letitia James stood alone, holding a match she never meant to light. The envelope didn't just rattle her, it followed her. By the time Letitia stepped into her conference room for the morning debrief, the room was colder. Staffers spoke softer. Eye contact was brief, as if the letter had whispered something to them too. She cleared her throat. "Schedule's still intact?" Her assistant hesitated, then nodded. "We've received media inquiries, unusual ones." Letitia's eyes narrowed. "From who?" "Washington Examiner, ON, and Fox. They're all asking about the mortgage disclosures." For a second, the Attorney General didn't move. Then she picked up her pen and pressed it to the table. Hard. A small crack formed in the lacquer beneath. She didn't say it, but the message was clear. Find out who leaked it. Shut it down. But outside that room, the leak was already alive. In a Capitol Hill media prep room, Stephen Miller stood behind a podium mock-up, rehearsing the lines he wouldn't need notes for. Letitia James built a brand on prosecutions that served her politics. She climbed a ladder made of subpoenas, and now she's choking on her own. He paused as Jim Jordan walked in, holding a copy of the disciplinary complaint like it was a loaded weapon. "We go live in 20 minutes, Jim said. "If she wants war in the court of public opinion, she just filed Exhibit A against herself." Stephen smiled faintly. "And unlike her, we won't need to fabricate anything." On screen, the headline was already loaded. "James under ethics review. Exclusive GOP response coming up." Back in New York, Letitia watched in silence from her private monitor, her name in bold, flanked by red banners. No legal briefing could undo what was happening now. The camera panned to Jim Jordan as he adjusted his mic. "This isn't revenge," he began. "This is justice returning the favor." And just like that, everything she built started to feel borrowed. They said it would be routine. 15 minutes, one chair, one anchor. Letitia James, live on CNN, setting the record straight. Every word had been vetted, every sentence rehearsed. Her team had reviewed the lighting, the angles, the closing line. She would walk in as the Attorney General. She would walk out as the victim of political smear. But studios have a way of bending the truth. Letitia sat beneath the glow of 1,000 watts and a single steady camera. Her posture was flawless. Her voice, confident. "These allegations," she began, "are noise, manufactured to distract. I've faced louder lies and larger men." She smirked, controlled. The anchor leaned in, cue cards shuffled discreetly under the table. Everything was on script, until it wasn't. "Attorney General," he said, pausing just long enough to raise tension, "can you confirm whether the Brooklyn property registered under DGM Holdings, LLC is connected to your niece?" The words hit like glass on marble. Letitia's eyes flickered, just once. The smile stayed, but the edge dulled. "I won't dignify gossip with confirmation," she replied. "Private entities are private for a reason." But the pause was half a beat too long. The delivery, half a tone too tight. The anchor pressed again, firmer this time. "So that's not a denial?" For a moment, the room forgot it was a set. Letitia adjusted her microphone. It didn't need adjusting. "This interview is over." She rose before the anchor could respond. Her team scrambled off camera. The screen faded, not to commercial, but to silence. In a congressional media war room, Stephen Miller stood still, eyes fixed on the feed. "Did she just walk off CNN?" Jim Jordan looked up from a legal pad filled with bullet points. "She didn't walk off. She ran." Within minutes, the clip exploded across the internet. "Your James LLC, Josh, you're no denial." When the hunter is hunted. And for the first time, the woman who made headlines prosecuting others had become the headline herself. Not because of what she said, but because of what she wouldn't. She slammed the door harder than she meant to. The moment Letitia James returned to her Albany office, the illusion cracked. Aides who once moved with certainty now hesitated. Eyes darted, hands fidgeted. The silence wasn't reverence anymore. It was fear. She tossed the earpiece onto the desk and paced. "Who gave them that question?" Her comms director swallowed hard. "CNN swore it wasn't pre-approved. They said it came through. Editorial discretion." Letitia turned slowly, her voice suddenly quiet. Too quiet. "Discretion is a luxury. I don't have time for luxury." The envelope, still on her desk, seemed to glow under the soft amber lights. It hadn't moved. Neither had the problem it carried. Across the state line in D.C., Jim Jordan handed a folder to a clerk on the House Judiciary Committee. The heading read, "Request for Ethics Oversight Inquiry. New York Office of the Attorney General, no press conference. No grandstanding, just cold paperwork." Stephen Miller waited in his office nearby, reviewing new evidence. Secondary holdings, third-party real estate contracts, a curious wire transfer involving a boutique mortgage lender. "She thought the microphone was her sword," he muttered. "Turns out it's just an amplifier." Jim entered the room, nodding once. "The inquiry's official now. Subpoenas are next." Back in Albany, Letitia stared out her window. She wasn't watching the city. She was watching reflections, her own fractured in the glass. "They won't win," she whispered to herself. But even she knew that in politics, defiance sounds a lot like doubt. Notifications pinged her phone nonstop. James' mortgage gate was now trending in 5 states. Public records requests were flooding her office. An anonymous FOIA leak hinted at a hidden property trust in Connecticut. She turned to her chief of staff. "Schedule a team meeting, full lockdown, no leaks, no slips, and someone tell the governor I'll need a statement of support. Today." But the governor's office wasn't answering. And in the background, the red envelope still sat where she left it, untouched, undeniable. By nightfall, the headlines had stopped asking questions. They had started writing conclusions. James silent on LLC allegations. GOP launches formal inquiry into NYAG. Brooklyn brownstone becomes battleground in legal firestorm. Letitia sat alone in her conference room. Lights dimmed. She watched the screen, muted, but the images were clear. Her name, her face, her record, unraveling in real time. Aide after aide had filed out hours ago, each with promises to circle back. None had returned. She turned to the red envelope, still untouched since morning, still undefeated. "I built this office from fire," she said to no one. "I'm not letting them burn it down." But fire doesn't ask for permission. It spreads. Down in D.C., Stephen Miller sat with a producer from a top-tier news platform, reviewing footage scheduled for release at sunrise. A compilation, Letitia's past statements on ethics, justice, transparency, cut directly against what the documents now revealed. "Don't dramatize it," Stephen said. Just let her words speak against themselves. Jim Jordan, on his way out of a committee room, stopped by briefly. Public hearings go to vote Friday. Once it's live, she's under oath. Stephen nodded. And the court of public opinion won't wait for the gavel. On social media, clips of Letitia's CNN interview had already been stitched with older speeches, where she once declared, "If you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear." It was playing on a loop, mocking, unforgiving. Back in Albany, she stood at the window again. The city was lit up, oblivious or indifferent. Letitia picked up the envelope one more time, turned it over, and placed it in her desk drawer. She locked it. But locks don't silence whispers, and nothing is ever hidden for long. The line outside the chamber wrapped down the marble corridor. Reporters, aides, lobbyists, they all wanted a seat, not because of who was being questioned, but because of who wasn't supposed to be. Letitia James had arrived 20 minutes early. Still, the eyes followed her like she was late. Inside, the hearing room buzzed with static tension, the kind that builds when no one wants to be the first to speak, but everyone wants to be the first to attack. Jim Jordan adjusted his mic. "Let's come to order." Gavels don't echo in modern chambers anymore, but the sound still cut through the murmurs like a warning shot. Letitia sat at the witness table. No entourage, no PR team, just a single folder in front of her, sealed. Her hand stayed folded. Her expression didn't. Jordan leaned forward. "Attorney General James, you're here voluntarily, but the record will be made regardless." She didn't flinch. "I'm here because I have nothing to hide." Stephen Miller, seated 2 rows behind Jordan, whispered to the staffer beside him. "That's lie number 1. Jordan clicked a remote. A screen lit up beside him. A slide appeared. DGM Holdings, LLC, Brooklyn Purchase, Beneficiary, Mariah F. James. He didn't ask a question. He just waited. Letitia blinked once. "My niece owns that property." "Under an LLC tied to your campaign donor's law firm?" Jordan asked. "That's a coincidence." "Coincidence isn't a legal defense." She shifted in her seat. The folder in front of her stayed closed. "Do you deny being involved in structuring the LLC?" A pause, not long, but long enough. "I had no operational involvement." Jordan raised a brow. "Not the same as denial, General." Stephen smirked. "That's the sound of rope tightening." The room hushed. Then Jim leaned in again. "Did you ever use your office to shield or delay public disclosure of this asset?" Letitia sat straighter. "I invoke my right to consult counsel." Gasps weren't allowed, but they happened anyway. Letitia James leaned back in her chair, her silence a shield and a signal. Jim Jordan tapped his pen once, letting the weight of her hesitation settle into the room like smoke. "The public isn't here for loopholes," he said. "They're here for clarity." Still no response. Then Stephen Miller rose from his seat in the gallery. He didn't need a microphone. His presence said enough. "Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to submit Exhibit 14 to the record." Jordan nodded once. An aide placed the file on the table in front of Letitia. It wasn't paper. It was a flash drive. "Contained within," Miller said calmly, "are time-stamped internal emails from the AG's office, discussing how to delay property disclosures in 2021, including one directive from a senior advisor, hold until post-election." She asked for space. Letitia's face didn't move, but her fingers curled slightly around the folder in front of her. Jordan turned to her. "Did you ask your staff to delay disclosure of financial documents to protect your public image?" Letitia opened her mouth. No sound came. "Did you use government channels to hide private gain?" She reached for her water, but didn't drink. "Did you think you were untouchable?" The room was silent, cameras zooming in just enough to catch the slight tremble at the edge of her hand. She finally spoke. "No laws were broken." Jordan leaned forward. "That wasn't the question." Outside, phones buzzed. The document had just gone public. Major news outlets pushed the leak live within seconds. CNN switched to a split screen. Letitia on the stand, and a banner below that read, "Breaking emails show AG delayed disclosures for political cover." Stephen didn't flinch. She just lost the media. Jordan didn't smile. He didn't need to. Letitia James, he said into the mic, you're not above this chamber, and you're not above the truth. Letitia closed her folder and said nothing. And in that nothing, the hearing room heard everything. The gavel hadn't struck again, but the verdict was already circling like blood in water. Letitia James walked briskly through the side hall of the Capitol. Her aides tried to keep up, but none of them spoke. They didn't need to. The leak had detonated mid-hearing. The flash drive Miller dropped wasn't a threat. It was an execution. Inside her office, 2 floors up, the damage was visible. Screens showed live footage from cable news. AG under fire. Leaked emails contradict public statements. Her chief of staff stood near the window, phone pressed to her ear. Governor's team says they won't issue a statement today. Letitia froze. What do you mean they won't? They said they're monitoring the situation. Her jaw clenched. They're not monitoring. They're running. The comms director entered, visibly pale. We've lost our biggest donor, Maxton Group. They just froze all future contributions. They're private sector. Why would they? Because they smell smoke. Across the city in a private press suite near Union Station, Stephen Miller reviewed the footage frame by frame. He wasn't celebrating. He was calibrating. You hit the queen, Jim, he said. Now we make sure the board doesn't reset. Jordan picked up the printed version of the emails. No redactions this time. Next step's a federal referral. We move this to oversight. Miller didn't blink. And if we're lucky, criminal ethics review. Letitia stared at the screen one more time. The split view showed her frozen at the hearing next to a bold red caption. Refuses to deny political obstruction. Her phone rang, unknown number. She didn't pick up, because the danger wasn't out there anymore. It was already inside. The door slammed behind her. Letitia James stared at the half-empty room. Her top deputy, Carolyn Hughes, wasn't at her desk. The chair was turned sideways. Her inbox was open, unlocked. Where is she? Letitia snapped. No one answered. She spun toward her press secretary, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. She walked, he said quietly. 15 minutes ago. Didn't even clear her drawer. Letitia's voice dropped an octave. And you let her? She wasn't asking. She gritted her teeth. Did she take anything? The secretary hesitated. She printed the draft ethics memo you marked confidential last week. A pause. Long. Heavy. She printed it. Letitia's tone sharpened. To who? Who's she talking to? The answer came not from him, but from the screen behind them. A breaking news banner flashed. Former James Deputy Flips submits confidential memo to House Oversight. Letitia stepped back, as if the wall itself had struck her. Meanwhile, across the Capitol, Jim Jordan stood at a podium flanked by 3 Oversight Committee members. The memo was now public. Pages of it, stamped, signed, verified. The document confirms that Attorney General James personally directed staff to delay financial disclosures tied to entities she had a personal interest in. He turned the page slowly, deliberately. Not negligence, not oversight, directive. Stephen Miller watched from the side, his arms folded. She just ran out of people to blame, he murmured. Back in Albany, Letitia gripped the edge of the desk. Get me legal, she ordered, but her legal counsel wasn't answering. Where the hell is Evan? She barked. He submitted resignation this morning, effective immediately. She slammed the drawer shut. I'm the Attorney General of New York. A junior aide, barely out of law school, said it before he could stop himself. Not for long. Letitia turned, eyes narrowed. What did you just say? But he didn't repeat it. He didn't have to. The last envelope didn't arrive in the mail. It came by hand, stamped, signed, delivered directly to the security desk at the Attorney General's office. The clerk who accepted it didn't even look inside. He just walked it upstairs in silence, placed it on Letitia's desk, and walked out. It was white, federal, and unmistakable. Letitia stared at it for a long moment, as if touching it would make it real. But reality didn't wait for her anymore. On the outside, United States District Court. Notice to appear inside, a federal summons, issued under the authority of the House Judiciary Oversight Committee, signed by a judge. She didn't need to read the fine print. She was no longer under investigation. She was now part of a proceeding. Across the country, newsrooms scrambled. Breaking: Letitia James ordered to testify under oath before federal committee. On Fox News, Stephen Miller sat opposite the host, documents fanned out in front of him. "We didn't chase her. We followed the record," he said. "She weaponized justice, and now it's turned on her." The host leaned forward. "Do you believe this ends in removal?" Stephen didn't blink. "I believe it ends in truth." Back on the Hill, Jim Jordan held the floor. This chamber gave her every chance to correct the record. She chose silence. She chose evasion. She chose concealment. That choice is now answered with process. He held up a thick binder. "We are referring Letitia James to the Department of Justice for criminal ethics violations, including obstruction, falsification of official documents, and abuse of power." The room erupted. Press, staff, even rivals whispering to each other. Jordan's voice rose over the static. "No one is above the Constitution. Not in this building. Not in New York." Letitia sat in her office, the envelope still unopened beside her. She wasn't alone, but for the first time in years she felt surrounded. Not by staff, but by consequences. The marble walls of the hearing room seemed colder now. Letitia James returned, not by choice, but by summons. This time she wasn't flanked by aides. She was flanked by legal counsel, and not her usual team. The man beside her was grim, sharp-eyed, and quiet. The kind of lawyer you hire when the narrative slips beyond spin. Across the chamber, Stephen Miller stood behind a bank of screens. Beside him, Jim Jordan reviewed a new exhibit, the flash drive they now called the archive. Jordan opened the session without pleasantries. "Attorney General James, welcome back. You are here today under federal compulsion, and you will answer under oath." Letitia adjusted the mic, her lawyer whispering something only she could hear. "I understand." Jordan didn't waste time. "Were you aware that 3 staffers under your office met with developers tied to your personal holdings?" Her lawyer spoke first. "My client was not involved in any such meetings directly." "Was she aware?" Miller interrupted, stepping forward. The room froze. Letitia turned. It was the first time she'd looked directly at Stephen Miller. "You don't get to question me," she snapped. Miller didn't blink. "I don't need to. The emails already did." He tapped the screen. A projection appeared. Subject line: "Met with D. James's team RE zoning adjustments. She's on board, quietly." Jordan leaned back. "Let's try again. Were you aware of staff-level meetings with real estate partners tied to DGM Holdings?" Letitia's lawyer leaned in again, but this time she raised her hand. "Yes, I was informed. Post facto." "And did you authorize any action?" "No directive was issued from my office." "That's not what we asked." Miller raised a second slide, a PDF memo with her digital signature. "This is a directive. Memo 44B from your desk. Sent after the meeting?" Letitia stared at the screen. The signature glowed like a scar. "That's taken out of context." "Then give us the context," Jordan said flatly. She didn't answer. Her lawyer reached for her hand under the table, but it was already clenched. The room felt smaller. Letitia James stared at the memo glowing behind her, her signature suspended in silence. Miller didn't blink. He stepped forward, not to intimidate, but to deliver. "Let me read the final paragraph," he said. Quote, "Ensure discretionary review bypass is processed before mid-cycle audit. Disclose nothing beyond public mandate." He turned to Jordan. "That's not just intent. That's concealment." Jordan nodded once, then looked back at Letitia. "Was this directive drafted by you or by staff acting on your instruction?" Letitia spoke slowly. "That memo was produced by the Legal Review Division," Miller cut in. "Whose director reports directly to you? And who, may I remind this chamber, resigned last week citing ethical concerns?" Letitia's lawyer raised a hand. "Mr. Chairman, unless there's an allegation of criminal intent." Jordan didn't let him finish. "There is." The room tensed. "This committee is in possession of wire transfers from a consulting firm linked to DGM Holdings to a campaign-linked nonprofit operated by a member of the AG's inner circle." Letitia's face tightened. Jordan held up the ledger. $87,000, moved in 7 transactions, all under FEC threshold for reporting. Letitia leaned in. You're implying something you can't prove. Miller's voice was low, too calm. We're not implying anything. We're documenting it. He lifted another file. Email attachment. Subject line, move the money through initiative forward. Keep it under radar. The silence cracked. Letitia turned to her lawyer, but he was already looking down, avoiding her eyes, avoiding the flame. Do you deny knowledge of the nonprofit? It's not my organization, she said coldly, but the founder shares your campaign treasurer, the address matches your PAC filing, and the accountant is your brother-in-law. She froze. For the first time since the hearing began, Letitia James looked cornered. You don't understand how political machines work, she whispered. Miller leaned in, steady. Number. You don't understand that this one just hit a wall. She didn't stand up. She exploded. Letitia James shoved the microphone back, hard enough to pop the audio feed. The thud echoed and every camera zoomed in. This entire hearing is a setup, she snapped. A circus led by men who've been trying to destroy me for years. Jordan didn't flinch. Miller didn't blink. But the press gallery leaned forward like sharks scenting blood. I won't sit here while partisans assassinate my name with half-truths and leaks. Then clarify the whole truth, Jordan said sharply. On record. Letitia turned on him. You're not interested in truth. You're interested in theater. Miller calmly slid the next exhibit across the table. Then read the script you wrote. On the screen, a timeline, 4 properties, 3 nonprofits, 2 shell firms, all with shared legal counsel, all connected to her campaign. Letitia stared at it. Then, without warning, she rose to her feet. This hearing is over. Jordan's voice was iron. It's not. You're under summons. She stepped away from the table. Then arrest me, because I'm done playing this game. Her lawyer tried to pull her sleeve, but she yanked free. Let them finish their smear job without me. Flashbulbs exploded the moment she stormed through the double doors. Outside, a wall of press waited. Microphones reached, but she didn't stop. Inside, Jordan slowly placed his gavel down. Let the record show the witness walked out under oath, mid-question, during federal inquiry. He looked toward Miller. You ready? Miller nodded. He opened the final folder. Here's the missing account statement. The one her office never disclosed. Offshore holdings. Cayman routing. Signed under her alias. Even the aides in the back gasped. Jordan looked directly into the main camera feed. This isn't political anymore. This is prosecutorial. The broadcast wasn't supposed to be live, but when Letitia James stormed out of the hearing room, every network switched to full coverage. What started as a political inquiry had become a public reckoning. Inside a CNN studio, a panelist whispered into her earpiece. We're cutting to her lawyer. He's making a statement. The screen split. On one side, Letitia pushing through reporters. On the other, her attorney, alone, visibly shaken. He adjusted his tie, looked straight into the camera and spoke. Effective immediately, I am resigning as counsel for Attorney General Letitia James. The anchor blinked. Excuse me? I cannot in good conscience continue legal representation. I've reviewed documentation presented to the committee today. Documents I was never shown. The studio went silent. Let me be clear, the lawyer continued. This isn't politics. This is misconduct. In real time, the story fractured, and the public felt it. Across town, Jim Jordan stood outside the chamber, surrounded by reporters. She didn't just walk out on a hearing, he said. She walked out on accountability. Miller stepped up beside him. This is what power looks like when it collapses, desperate, defiant, and alone. At that moment, a notification buzzed across every journalist's phone. Breaking, U.S. Attorney's Office. Confirms preliminary review into NYAG Letitia James for financial fraud and obstruction. The crowd erupted. Flashbulbs, questions, shouting. But inside Jordan's calm voice was the real fire. Letitia James built a platform accusing others of corruption. She made a career weaponizing prosecution. He turned to the cameras. And now, she'll face what she gave. Stephen Miller didn't say a word. Instead, he held up a USB drive. Tonight, we go national. Back in Albany, Letitia sat alone in her office. The lights were off. The blinds were shut, and the desk empty, except for one thing. The white envelope, still unopened, still waiting. The studio lights flickered on. Not red, not blue. White, neutral, final. Stephen Miller adjusted his collar as the countdown began in his earpiece. We go live in 5, 4, 3. No teleprompter, no script. Just a single line taped to the edge of the desk. Let the facts speak louder than her press team ever could. The broadcast opened cold, no theme music. Just Miller, framed in silence. Tonight, he began, you're not watching opinion. You're watching evidence. On screen behind him, a rotating reel of documents. Wire transfers, confidential memos, unredacted emails, zoning maps marked with handwritten annotations. For years, Letitia James positioned herself as the hammer of justice. But when the hammer turned toward her own foundation, the cracks weren't just visible, they were structural. He paused only once. What you're about to see was entered into congressional record, but the public never saw it, until now. He clicked a remote. The screen shifted. Here is a signed authorization from James' office, approving delayed disclosure of personal assets, days before a major campaign fundraiser hosted by the same firm listed as beneficiary. Another file. This is a bank trace. It follows nonprofit donations, supposedly for community outreach, routed through a shell account tied to a vacation property in the Hamptons. Miller's voice never rose. It didn't have to. This isn't conspiracy. This isn't smear. This is a paper trail, and it ends at her desk. Back in Albany, Letitia James sat alone. The television glowed across the room, casting her shadow on the wall. The envelope was still there, but the knock came first. 3 taps, firm followed by a voice. Federal Marshal, open the door. She didn't move. The broadcast continued in the background, and across America, voters weren't just watching anymore. They were deciding the camera lens didn't blink, but Letitia James did. This wasn't behind closed doors. This was an open hearing, televised, broadcast live, and the first question wasn't soft. Jim Jordan leaned into the mic. Attorney General James, did you personally authorize campaign-related nonprofits to funnel donations through LLCs associated with your private holdings? Letitia cleared her throat, her voice distant. On advice of counsel, I invoked the 5th. A low murmur rippled across the chamber. Jordan didn't flinch. Let me rephrase. Did you or your staff coordinate the timing of real estate filings to avoid mandatory disclosure during an election year? Letitia stared straight ahead. I invoked the 5th. The third question hit harder. Did you accept in-kind benefits, including property upgrades, travel, or security services, from any entity currently under state investigation? Her lips barely moved. I invoked the 5th. Outside, protesters gathered. Some shouted for justice. Others shouted for jail time. But inside, Stephen Miller sat in a separate room, preparing his testimony. His hands didn't shake. His file was already open. Ready? A marshal asked. Miller nodded once. She thought this was about money, he said. It never was. This was about power. He stepped into the chamber. Letitia's chair was now empty. Jim Jordan addressed the witness. Mr. Miller, do you affirm the documents you provided were obtained legally and without coercion? I do. And are you prepared to testify to the coordination between the AG's office and private firms to redirect state oversight? Yes. Jordan handed him a binder. Then please explain to this chamber what you labeled Operation Snowcap. Miller opened the folder. It's the internal nickname used by Letitia's team to reference the LLC filter system. We trace the payments, we trace the emails, and we trace the people. He looked up, but she wasn't alone. The chamber hushed. Jordan leaned in. Who else? Miller's eyes locked forward. Her conduit, the one who built the structure, former DNC counsel. You'll know the name. He paused and then said it. Marc Elias. The name struck like lightning. Marc Elias, the architect behind countless legal maneuvers. The man who drafted the playbook, now part of the play. Inside the hearing chamber, even the Democrats on the panel shifted uncomfortably. Stephen Miller didn't pause. He flipped the page. Emails between Elias and senior AG staff. Subject lines like structure review, blind donor layers, and DGM crossover. Use hybrid path. Jordan leaned into the mic. You're suggesting the campaign finance routes weren't improvised. They were engineered? No, Chairman, Miller said calmly. I'm stating it. He held up another file. Bank transaction reports, signatures, private contracts between Elias's law firm and Shell nonprofits embedded in the James network. Jordan raised his voice just enough. When did you realize Elias was behind the system? Miller nodded toward the screen behind him. A document filled the frame. The moment we found this, a 6-page legal strategy memo labeled Asset Obfuscation Strategy, Phase 3. It bore Marc Elias's watermark. Across town in a Georgetown brownstone, Elias sat with his legal counsel, watching it all unfold on a muted screen. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. Get me the DOJ, he muttered. Now. Back in the chamber, Miller didn't stop. This isn't just a New York scandal. It's a federalized laundering scheme, one that used legal complexity as camouflage. He glanced across the room. Letitia James wasn't the mastermind. She was the vessel. A beat. Then he added, the real engine was Elias. Outside, the media caught fire. Every chyron, every alert, every feed blazed with one word. Elias. CNN cut in. Fox went wall to wall. MSNBC tried to deflect and failed. Inside the hearing, Jordan held up a draft. I'm introducing a motion to issue a federal subpoena for Marc Elias, effective immediately. The clerk took it. The gavel hit once. Motion carried. The war just crossed state lines. The room didn't expect a third witness. But when the name was called, every journalist in the chamber jolted. Ms. Claire Donnelly, former Director of Communications Strategy for Attorney General Letitia James. She walked in slowly, no security escort, no counsel beside her. Just a single file folder clutched in her hands. Stephen Miller didn't look surprised. Jim Jordan leaned forward. Ms. Donnelly, are you here voluntarily? Yes, Chairman. Are you prepared to testify under oath regarding your time in the communications war room for AG James? I am, Jordan gestured. Proceed. Claire opened the folder and held up a document. This is a directive we received the morning after the initial leak. It outlines media strategy, approved language, and deflection tactics. On the screen behind her, the file appeared. Title, Crockett Talking Points, April 11th version, final draft. The bullet points were surgical. Frame the leak as partisan sabotage. Push narrative. No formal charges. No crime. Coordinate hashtags with allied influencers. Avoid direct answers on DGM holdings. Jordan stared. Are these internal directives? Written by Letitia herself. Edited by Elias' media team. A gasp swept the gallery. Miller stood. Did you send this document to any press contacts? Claire nodded. Yes, under pressure. We were told non-compliance meant we were off the team. Jordan raised an eyebrow. What changed? The truth was bigger than the spin. Outside, newsrooms had stopped typing. They were now copying. Letitia's PR machine wasn't just crumbling, it was testifying. Inside a dim studio in D.C., Marc Elias stared at the screen. His phone vibrated. A single text from an old contact in DOJ. Get a lawyer, and not one you trained. The marshal entered quietly, but the paper in his hand was louder than any accusation. He approached the clerk's bench, whispered something, and handed over a sealed envelope. Jim Jordan paused mid-question. Is that what I think it is? The clerk nodded. Jordan adjusted the mic. Let the record show. This chamber has received an official notification from the Office of the Governor of New York. He opened it, scanned the text, and read aloud. Effective immediately, Attorney General Letitia James is suspended from her duties pending federal investigation. A thunderclap of flash bulbs went off outside the chamber. In every newsroom, red banners rolled across the screen. Breaking NYAG Letitia. James suspended. Statewide investigation launched. Claire Donnelly sat motionless. Then she reached for the final page in her folder. There's one more thing. Jordan turned. You're still under oath, Miss Donnelly. I know. She placed a printed memo on the overhead projector. Its title was stark, bold, typed in 16-point font. The Endgame, Full Containment Protocol, version 1. Jordan read the top line aloud. Objectives: 1. Obstruct external audits. 2. Preposition blame. 3. Activate surrogate offensive. Claire spoke slowly. This was our backup plan if the first leak couldn't be contained. It was designed by Elias. Letitia signed off. The room fell into a chilling silence. Stephen Miller stood, his voice low but steel-edged. You had a written strategy, not just to deny, but to discredit whistleblowers before they existed? Claire nodded. We had message trees prepared for every potential breach. They didn't plan for defense. They planned for fallout. At that moment outside the Capitol, a subpoena was delivered to Marc Elias's private law office. Inside, a federal order to appear, a demand for records, and a warning: tampering would trigger obstruction charges. Back in the hearing chamber, Jordan closed the binder. This hearing is adjourned, for now, but the trial has already begun. The headlines didn't ask questions anymore. They made statements. James indicted on federal charges. Marc Elias ordered to testify under oath. State DOJ collapses as internal emails surface. Letitia James stood before a federal magistrate. No press, no podium, just the weight of the seal behind the judge. Ms. James, you are charged with obstruction of justice, conspiracy to defraud, and financial misconduct across multiple election cycles. Her lawyer leaned in. We plead not guilty. But the courtroom didn't react. The news had already passed that stage. Across the country, Stephen Miller stood behind a podium of his own. This time, not in a hearing, in front of America. This wasn't about campaign violations, he said. It was about power hiding behind process. He paused. And it wasn't just Letitia James. The reporter stiffened. We traced accounts. We mapped law firm transfers. And we uncovered a fund, buried beneath layered LLCs. That fund fed not just her office, but legal operations tied to litigation groups in D.C., New York, and Atlanta. He held up a single sheet. And the name on the routing authorization wasn't Letitia? A still fell across the room. Jim Jordan, watching from the side, stepped forward. Are you saying this network went beyond Elias? Yes. Who? Miller lifted a copy of the authorization form. It leads to a D.C. consultancy operating out of a firm registered under the name Robert Creamer. Gasps. Journalists flipped pages. Old names, old scandals. Now connected. Back in New York, Letitia sat in a holding chamber. The cuffs weren't visible, but the silence was worse. Her phone vibrated once. A final message from Elias' office. He's flipping, and you're alone. She didn't reply, because there was nothing left to say. The headlines didn't ask questions anymore. They made statements. James indicted on federal charges. Marc Elias ordered to testify under oath. State DOJ collapses as internal emails surface. Letitia James stood before a federal magistrate. No press, no podium. Just the weight of the seal behind the judge. Ms. James, you are charged with obstruction of justice, conspiracy to defraud, and financial misconduct across multiple election cycles. Her lawyer leaned in. We plead not guilty. But the courtroom didn't react. The news had already passed that stage. Across the country, Stephen Miller stood behind a podium of his own. This time, not in a hearing, in front of America. This wasn't about campaign violations, he said. It was about power hiding behind process. He paused. And it wasn't just Letitia James. The reporter stiffened. We traced accounts. We mapped law firm transfers. And we uncovered a fund buried beneath layered LLCs. That fund fed not just her office, but legal operations tied to litigation groups in D.C., New York, and Atlanta. He held up a single sheet, and the name on the routing authorization wasn't Letitia. A still fell across the room. Jim Jordan, watching from the side, stepped forward. Are you saying this network went beyond Elias? Yes. Who? Miller lifted a copy of the authorization form. It leads to a D.C. consultancy operating out of a firm registered under the name Robert Creamer. Gasps. Journalists flipped pages. Old names, old scandals. Now, connected. Back in New York, Letitia sat in a holding chamber. The cuffs weren't visible, but the silence was worse. Her phone vibrated once. A final message from Elias's office. He's flipping, and you're alone. She didn't reply. Because there was nothing left to say, it came in a plain envelope. No return address, no postage. Just the words, for Stephen Miller. Eyes only. Delivered by hand to his office. No one saw who brought it, but everyone would see what was inside. Miller opened the flap slowly. Inside, a black USB drive, attached to a single yellow post-it. They never expected anyone to survive past Phase 3. He inserted the drive, and the screen exploded to life. Internal DOJ emails, private Slack logs, unpublished memos marked not for disclosure. Entire folder trees titled Asset Buffer Chain, New York, D.C., Texas. Miller's eyes moved fast, but one line stopped him cold. Priority reroute initiated per WH-23 protocol. Suppress pending audit alerts, RE, AG, New York, and Elias connection. He leaned back. They weren't just ignoring oversight, he whispered. They were rewriting the system to delete it. In a secure room on the Hill, Jim Jordan read through printouts of the same data. We need to bring this into the public record, now. Miller didn't hesitate. We don't leak this to the media. We broadcast it, ourselves. Outside, the DOJ issued a rare midnight statement. A special federal task force has been activated to investigate allegations raised by whistleblower testimony and newly surfaced digital evidence. But by morning, it was already too late to contain it. At 9 a.m., Miller stepped in front of the camera again. No preamble, no graphics, just one image on the screen behind him. A flowchart from DOJ to Letitia James to Elias to undisclosed federal observers at the top. This isn't just political corruption, he said. It's administrative engineering, built to conceal, protect, and recycle power. This file proves it. Jordan joined him. And now we prove who funded it. They called it The Wire, an encrypted chain of micro-donations, layered beneath nonprofits, channeled through digital wallets. But the numbers didn't lie. When the forensic team completed the audit, the screen lit up like a constellation. Red lines, blue dots, and one black node, pulsing at the center. Stephen Miller pointed to it. That's the terminal source. Jim Jordan leaned closer. Where does it trace? The technician pulled up the final node. The label read, Civic Harmony Project, 2020 Election Infrastructure Grant Initiative. Jordan froze. I know that name. So did Miller. It was the same philanthropic initiative that had helped fund voter registration drives in Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. The same one that claimed to be nonpartisan. The same one chaired, briefly, by a now silent tech billionaire and a former White House data consultant. You're telling me this wasn't just money laundering, Jordan said slowly. It was election infrastructure laundering. The room went quiet. Miller brought up the routing sheet. Funds came from federal education grants, diverted through Civic Harmony. From there, laundered through 38 LLCs, then pushed into entities tied to Letitia James's inner circle. He turned to Jordan. And the Elias Defense Fund came from the same pipe. A new file popped up, dated October 28, 2020. Memo subject, Buffer the Red States, begin cycle A2. The sender? An email tag from DNC Stratopsolular, internal at protonmail.com. Jordan slammed the binder shut. We're not talking about corruption anymore. He looked straight into the camera. We're talking about systemic subversion. Outside, as the feed went viral, Americans didn't argue over left or right. They asked one question. How deep does this go? It was after midnight when Stephen Miller heard the knock. Not loud, not hesitant, just deliberate. He opened the door. No name. No face he recognized. Just a man in a coat, holding a manila envelope. You already know what's inside, the man said. Miller didn't blink. Then why hand it to me? Because you're the only one who hasn't blinked. He placed the envelope on the table, turned, and vanished into the fog. Inside, a handwritten list, no logos, no seals, just initials, dozens of them, some crossed out, some circled. At the bottom, Phase 0 was never about one candidate. It was about resetting the chain. Meanwhile, on the Hill, Jim Jordan reviewed the final documents for the federal grand jury submission. 3 binders, labeled structure, flow, names. He closed the last file. It's not just a conspiracy, he whispered to no one. It was a design. Across America, the public wasn't divided by party anymore. They were united by betrayal. Letitia James had been indicted. Marc Elias had testified. The DOJ had cracked open. But the wound was deeper than all of them. The final scene unfolded not in a courtroom, not in a press conference, but in living rooms, dorms, churches, fire stations. Everywhere citizens sat and watched. Stephen Miller's final words echoed across the screen. They told you to stop asking questions. They called it partisan. They mocked accountability. They lied. He looked into the camera. Now it's your turn. Fade to black. A single line appears. Democracy dies in silence. But it's reborn when someone finally speaks.